You do this, and no one gets hurt. You have no say.
Don't do this, Floyd.
Sweetheart, around here, women like you don't file complaints. They apologize. He said it low. Not for the room, for her. That particular register men like Floyd Kessler had perfected over a lifetime of small, private dominance. Close enough that no one else quite catches the words, far enough back to deny them, if it ever came to that. His coffee cup sat tilted on the edge of the table, a slow, dark stain spreading outward across the laminate like something deliberate, like something planned. If you've ever watched a man do damage and then smile at the cleanup crew, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens in the next 2 hours is exactly that story, except the cleanup crew had a different agenda entirely. Imani Cross did not move. She stood 3 feet from table 7 with her order pad in her left hand and her pen still uncapped. And she did not step back, and she did not lower her eyes. The coffee was still spreading. Her uniform had taken the initial pour across the left shoulder, the kind of burn that sits under the skin for days, the kind that leaves a memory even after the mark fades. The Pecan House Grill on Calvert Street in Maywood, Georgia, had 22 tables. At that moment, on a Tuesday morning at 8:03 a.m., 11 of them were occupied. Every person at those 11 tables heard the cup hit the floor. The sound was sharp, clean, unavoidable. And in the half second that followed, before Floyd Kessler's group at table 7 started laughing, before the manager's door opened a crack and closed again, before anyone made a decision about whether to react, there was that particular silence that fills a room when something wrong has just been done in public, and every witness is deciding, privately and quickly, how much courage they actually have. The cup hit the floor. The smile did not. The Calverton County Sheriff's Department dispatch log. Call ID 4411, timestamped 7:54 a.m. that morning, recorded the following entry. Unit responding to Pecan House Grill, Calvert Street. Report of disturbance. Complainant, Floyd Kessler. 7:54. Imani Cross did not arrive for her shift until 7:48. Floyd Kessler's table had not been seated until 7:56. Someone had called in a complaint before the woman they were complaining about had even poured the first pot of the morning. That was the detail that would matter later. It always is. Imani Cross had been working the morning shift at Pecan House Grill for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She knew this not because she had been counting days the way a prisoner counts them, hatching marks on a wall, waiting for something to end, but because she kept a notebook. It was a small, hardbound notebook, narrow-ruled, the kind sold 3 for $4 at the office supply store on 5th Street. She had gone through 7 of them since starting at Pecan House. Each one contained the same kind of entries: date, time, table number, incident, if any, and 2 columns on the right-hand margin that she labeled simply O for observed and D for documented. The D column meant she had it in writing somewhere else: a photograph, a saved receipt, a note on her phone with a timestamp. The O column meant she had seen it, but it was only hers for now. Every morning before her first table, she read the notices posted near the front entrance. Georgia Food Handler Certification, occupancy limits, fire exit requirements, and the trespass notice framed in a thin black frame with glass, positioned at eye level, which contained, verbatim, as required, the statutory language under Georgia Code Section 16721, that any person who knowingly and without authority remains on the premises after being asked to leave by the owner or authorized agent may be charged with criminal trespass. She had read it so many times she could have recited it from the kitchen. She read it anyway, every morning, because that was the kind of discipline she had learned a long time ago in a context that had nothing to do with coffee and laminate tables. Maywood was a town of 11,000 people in a county where everybody knew everybody. And the Pecan House Grill was the kind of place where knowing everybody was both its primary asset and its primary liability. Imani had come to Maywood from Atlanta 2.5 years earlier, the kind of quiet relocation that doesn't announce itself. She had rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a building on Marble Street, 3 blocks from the diner. She had applied for the waitstaff position the second week she arrived, been hired the third, and had operated in the estimation of every coworker and regular customer as a woman who was competent, unhurried, and notably private. She was 51 years old. She stood 5'6". Her hair was natural, close cropped at the sides, and she wore the same style of apron, white with a navy border, every shift washed and pressed. She knew her regulars the way good waitstaff always do. Mrs. Ella Potts, retired schoolteacher, decaf with a half teaspoon of honey. The 2 contractors who came in Mondays and Wednesdays and always split the biscuit platter. Deacon Ezra Park, who arrived every Friday at 6:55 a.m., ordered the same oatmeal with dried cranberries, and tipped exactly 20% to the cent. He was the only customer who had ever asked her name on the first visit and remembered it on the second without being reminded. What her co-workers and customers had never quite registered was the way Imani processed a room. Not emotionally, she was warm enough with regulars, efficient with new tables, patient with children, but structurally, she absorbed spatial information the way a person absorbs temperature, automatically, continuously, without apparent effort. She could tell you, at any point during a shift, how many tables were occupied, which had been waiting longest, which customer had the particular physical tension of someone about to ask for the check. She noticed exits first when she entered a room. She noticed who was watching whom. She noticed with particular attention the moments when a conversation stopped because she walked by, and the moments when it didn't stop because the people having it had decided she wasn't worth adjusting for. This last observation was the most informative. People who believe a witness is insignificant are careless witnesses themselves. The Pecan House served breakfast and lunch only, closing at 2 p.m. daily. The kitchen closed 20 minutes before the front of house, which meant that the last 20 minutes of each shift were a kind of slow unwinding, tables paying out, booths emptying, the room returning to itself. Imani used those 20 minutes to update her notebook. She sat at the end of the counter, where the service computer was positioned, and where her presence was both appropriate and functionally invisible, and she wrote while the last customers finished their meals. Nobody noticed. Nobody had reason to. The notebook was not her only documentation system, and she was methodical about that. Everything that went into the notebook as D had a corresponding record somewhere else. A photograph, a time-stamped text message she sent to her own number, a screenshot of a portal record, a printed confirmation of a conversation that had taken place by email. The redundancy was not anxiety, it was architecture. She had learned, a long time ago in a setting she had never described to anyone in Maywood, that a single record can be explained away. A second record requires explanation. A third record becomes a pattern. A pattern documented across multiple independent systems becomes something that even the most motivated institution has difficulty dismantling. She had been, in all observable respects, exactly what she appeared to be: a careful woman, a good worker, a quiet presence in a town that had not been expecting her and had not quite decided what to make of her. The trouble with Floyd Kessler had begun 11 months into her employment. He was a contractor, not the 2 biscuit platter contractors, not the kind who showed up in muddy boots and kept their heads down. Floyd Kessler was the kind who had a company, or said he did, and wore clean clothes to the diner because the diner was partly an office, partly a stage. He was 38, built wide across the shoulders, with the particular confidence of a man who had never been seriously told no by anyone he respected. He occupied table 7, the corner booth with the view of both the door and the counter, with the ease of a man who considers his preferences to be facts. He had come to the Pecan House 3 to 4 mornings a week since before Imani arrived. The staff who'd been there longer described him as a regular. The word carried a weight in small-town service establishments that it does not carry elsewhere. Regulars have standing. Regulars have expectations. And Kessler's expectation, which he communicated not through anything so direct as a statement, but through the cumulative architecture of small behaviors, was that his environment should arrange itself around his comfort. The first incident Imani recorded in her notebook came 43 days into her employment. Kessler had been seated at table 7 with 2 other men and had flagged her down, not with the patient raised hand of someone waiting, but with the snapping finger and the lowered voice of someone accustomed to summoning rather than requesting. When she had approached, he had looked at her uniform, looked at her face and said, "Where's Patrice?" Patrice was the previous morning waitress who had transferred to the lunch shift 2 weeks earlier. Imani had explained this. Kessler had looked back at his companions and said, without lowering his voice enough to make it private, "I guess we'll have to manage." The table had laughed. Imani had written in her notebook, "Day 43, Table 7, FK implied preference for previous staff by race. 2 companions, 8:12 a.m. Oh, no incident, just a notation." That was how it worked with men like Kessler. Nothing ever rose to the level of actionable on its own. It was a slow accumulation, the way water damages stone. Each drop insufficient, the pattern everything. Lavender Quint had been a fixture at Pecan House since long before Imani's arrival. She was 44, the wife of Alderman Carter Vane, a city council member whose portfolio included the Business and Economic Development Committee, and by extension, quiet influence over the annual renewal of business operating licenses in Maywood. Lavender understood this influence the way a person understands weather. Not something she'd created, simply something she existed within and knew how to use. She came in most Tuesday and Thursday mornings with a rotating group of 2 or 3 other women, always dressed in the particular way of someone who has decided that appearing effortless requires significant effort. She ordered a fruit plate and green tea. She tipped 12%, and she referred to Imani consistently across 23 months of observation as the new girl, despite the fact that Imani had, by the 14-month mark, been there longer than 2 of the other waitstaff. It was not aggressive. It was the kind of diminishment that operates below the threshold of anything you could put in a report. The use of girl for a 51-year-old woman, the slight pause before saying her when pointing Imani out to a companion, the habit of redirecting requests to the other staff when Imani was clearly the assigned server. None of it provable, all of it documented. Dorian Merck managed the Pecan House under a franchise arrangement with the regional chain owner. He was 52, a former regional sales manager who had made the move to small format food service management, his phrase, from his first week introduction, after a restructuring at his previous employer. He ran the diner with a devotion to procedure that had the form of professionalism and the content of self-protection. Every complaint went through a standard review cycle. Every conflict became a documentation process, and every process had a timeline that Merck controlled completely. He had been pleasant to Imani from the start, in the way of a man who is careful not to be the cause of anything that could later be characterized as a hostile environment. He had not done anything overtly wrong. He had also not done a number of things that a manager in his position was required by the employee handbook to do. Follow-up documentation after reported incidents, written acknowledgement of verbal complaints, proper maintenance of shift incident logs. These absences were not dramatic. They were the kind of gaps that only become visible when someone goes looking. Wells Ford had been on the morning shift for 14 months, hired 4 months after Imani. He was 41, affable in the surface-level way of someone who understands that being liked is useful currency. He collected small pieces of information the way other people collect points at a coffee shop, casually, incrementally, without apparent purpose. He knew which customers were having trouble at home. He knew which staff members were in conflict with Merck. He knew, somehow, when complaints were going to be filed before they were filed. Imani had noticed this quality in him by month 3. By month 6, she had a word for it. By month 9, she had a theory. By month 14, the theory had enough supporting notation in her O column to start moving some of it to D. None of these pieces on their own would have been enough. The diner was just a diner. The regulars were just regulars. The small aggressions were small. The manager was just careful. The co-worker was just friendly. But Imani Cross had spent a large portion of her professional life in a context she had not discussed with anyone in Maywood, in rooms that were not diners, learning to read patterns before they became crises. She noticed the patterns at Pecan House the same way she always had, early, quietly, and in writing. The Tuesday that everything shifted had begun, like most Tuesdays, with Imani arriving at 5:45 a.m., before the prep cook and well before Dorian Merck, who rarely appeared before 7:30. She propped the back door, turned on the fryer, ran a check of the prep station, and opened her notebook to a fresh page. She dated it at the top. She noted the time, 5:47 a.m. By the time the first customers arrived at 6:50, she had already read the notices near the entrance, reviewed the specials board, and recorded the opening status of the coffee station, which had a heating element that had been running inconsistently for 3 weeks, and which Merck had logged as submitted for repair without, as far as Imani had been able to determine, actually submitting it. She made a note of the heating element. At 7:52, Floyd Kessler came through the front door with 2 men she had seen before. Garrett Hull, who worked for a property management firm on the east side of town, and a younger man whose name she had never caught, but who wore consistently a cap with a construction logo she didn't recognize. All 3 went directly to table 7. Imani took their order at 7:57. Kessler ordered black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, and biscuits. He did not say thank you. He did not look up from his phone when she read back the order. She wrote it on her pad, clipped it, and returned to the counter. At 8:01, she brought the coffee. She set Kessler's cup first, as was her practice, starting with the person who had ordered first. She moved to set the second cup for Garrett Hull, and as she turned back toward the third, her elbow brushed the edge of the tray. Not a collision, not a stumble. The ordinary geometry of a narrow aisle and a table positioned too close to the wall. The cup on the edge of her tray tilted. She steadied it before it fell. What happened next was not accidental. Kessler's hand moved, a short, deliberate motion from his side of the table, and connected with the base of Imani's tray. The cup she had steadied went over. Hot coffee. The Pecan House served it at 185 degrees Fahrenheit in accordance with the chain's posted service standards, poured across the left side of her shoulder and down her arm, soaking through the thin cotton of her uniform. The burn was immediate, the kind that registers in the nervous system before the brain fully processes it, a white heat that takes a moment to translate into pain. Her jaw tightened. Her hand gripped the now empty tray. She did not cry out. Kessler was already leaning back in his seat, arms spread in the universal gesture of innocence. "Whoa, easy there, slipped right out of your hands." Hull was reaching for a napkin. The younger man with the cap was looking at the floor. Neither of them said anything. Imani set the tray down on the edge of the table. She looked at her arm. She looked at Kessler. Then she said, evenly and without raising her voice, "That will need to be documented." Documented. He repeated the word with the particular amusement of a man who finds technical language coming from a waitress inherently comic. "Sure thing, sweetheart. Document away." And that was when he said it, the sentence from the beginning of this story, the one delivered low, for her only. "Around here, women like you don't file complaints. They apologize." Imani was already walking to the counter. She picked up her notebook. She wrote the time, 8:03 a.m., and she wrote, "Table 7, FK, physical contact with tray, Coffee spilled, left shoulder and arm, sustained burn, stated, slipped right out of your hands. Private statement. Around here, women like you don't file complaints. 3 witnesses at table. G. Hull, unknown male. Heating element on station 2 still inconsistent. D. Photo of burn area taken at 8:04. She stepped back to the prep area, confirmed the camera on her phone captured the reddening skin on her left arm, and time-stamped it. Then she went to find Dorian Merck. He was in his office with the door 3/4 closed, which was his standard configuration for a morning when he wanted to be technically present without being technically available. Imani knocked once and pushed the door open. "I need to file an incident report," she said. "Table 7. A customer made physical contact with my tray and hot coffee was poured on my arm. I have photographic documentation of the burn." Merck looked up from his laptop. His expression passed through 3 phases in about 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, and the particular settling that happens when a man decides which version of a situation he is going to commit to. "Are you okay?" he asked. The question had the form of concern. "I'm documenting this now, and I'm asking you to log it in the official incident record." "Of course." He reached for a drawer, pulled out a form. "Let's get this sorted. These things happen in a fast-paced environment. Someone's tray tilts, a cup goes over. It's a hazard of the job. You know how it is." "The cup did not tilt because of the environment," Imani said. "The customer's hand made contact with my tray." Merck's pen paused. "Did you see that clearly? It was probably just, close quarters, someone reaching for something." "Mr. Merck," her voice remained at the same register it had been since she walked in. "The Georgia Department of Labor's workplace incident reporting requirements under the state occupational safety framework require that any injury to an employee resulting from customer interaction be logged as a third-party incident, not as an equipment malfunction or environmental hazard. I'm asking you to log this as a third-party incident." He looked at her for a long moment. "I hear you," he said finally. "I'll make sure it goes in the log." She waited while he filled out the form. She watched him write. When he listed the cause of incident, he wrote, "Accidental spill during service, tray contact." She watched him do it and did not say anything, because she already knew she was going to request a copy, and she already knew what a copy with that language was going to demonstrate later, and she already knew the difference between the form in his drawer and the form she was going to photograph before she left his office. "I'll need a copy of that," she said. He made one. She folded it and put it in the front pocket of her apron, against her notebook. Walking back to the floor, she passed Wells Ford restocking the sugar station near the window. He was positioned with a clear sight line to Merck's office door, and had been since before she walked in. He did not look at her directly when she passed. He looked at the sugar packets he was loading into the ceramic holder, one at a time, with a focus that was slightly too deliberate for a task that required no focus at all. She noted the time, 8:11 a.m. At table 7, Floyd Kessler had finished his eggs. He was leaning back with his coffee, a fresh cup poured by Wells Ford, while Imani was in Merck's office. And he was talking with Garrett Hull at a volume calibrated for easy overhearing. "These places, they hire anybody," he was saying, in the same low register he'd used with her earlier. "Corporate doesn't care. They just need warm bodies on the floor." Hull was nodding. The young man with the cap had his eyes on his phone. Imani walked past table 7 without looking at it. She picked up the coffee pot, refilled Mrs. Potts at the counter, and asked if she wanted another corn muffin. Mrs. Potts said yes, that she was treating herself today, and Imani noted that she said it with the small, careful pride of a woman on a fixed income for whom a second muffin was a real decision. Imani brought the muffin. She did not charge for it. It was a thing she did for Mrs. Potts that she had never explained and never mentioned. Then she went back to her notebook and wrote the time Floyd Kessler's group left, 8:22 a.m. She wrote the amount of the check, $14.60. She wrote the tip, 0. She also wrote, And this was a notation she had not made before, a new column she added on that particular page for that particular entry, a line she labeled F for followed up. Beside it she wrote, incident form copied, burn photographed, Merck's language, RE, cause documented, W, forward position during reporting noted. The F column would appear on every page of her notebook from that day forward. The social escalation came first, the way it usually does, before anything formal, before anything legal, in the domain where small towns do most of their real business. Reputation. Lavender Quint arrived the following Thursday at 8:15 a.m. with two women Imani recognized as members of the Maywood Neighborhood Business Alliance, an organization whose monthly breakfasts were held, as it happened, at the Pecan House, a relationship that represented a meaningful percentage of the diner's midweek revenue. The three women took a table in Imani's section. When Imani approached with menus, Lavender looked up with the measured warmth of a woman who had decided in advance how this encounter would go. I think we'll ask for Linda today, she said. Linda was the other morning waitress, currently running 3 tables on the far side of the room. Imani said, of course. She went to let Linda know and returned to her own section. For the next 40 minutes, Lavender Quint conducted a conversation at a volume designed for partial overhearing. Imani caught phrases in the natural course of moving between her tables. The atmosphere has changed. These things do affect a business. I'm sure she's a perfectly fine person. I just, the ellipsis was doing a great deal of work. It was doing, in fact, all the work that a direct statement would have done with none of the accountability. The following Tuesday, 2 of Imani's regular tables, 4 top that came in every week for a late breakfast, and a 2-top couple who'd been regular since the diner opened, asked to be seated in Linda's section. They offered no explanation. They didn't have to. Imani wrote the table numbers, the time, and the date in her notebook. She wrote LQ in the O column. Then she added a new notation. Pattern begin, social redirection. 2 tables previously regular. She also wrote in the F column, this is a measurable change, baseline established. The measurable change mattered because Imani was not approaching this emotionally, or rather, she was doing what she had done for a long time in high-pressure situations, which was to feel the emotion and then set it on a shelf where it would not interfere with her work. The grief of being pushed out was real. The quiet of tables that had been warm for 2 years going deliberately elsewhere was real. She did not minimize it. She also did not let it consume her capacity to observe accurately. By the end of that week, she had documented the redirection of 5 regular tables. All of them had occurred within 9 days of the coffee incident. All of them had moved to Linda's section. The pattern was clean enough to mean something. On a Friday morning 3 weeks after the coffee incident, she received a text message from Dorian Merck at 6:40 a.m., before her shift started, informing her that the schedule for the following 2 weeks had been revised and that she would be moving from 4 morning shifts to 3 due to revised customer volume projections. The text was written in the corporate phrasing that Merck used when he was communicating something he did not want to own personally. She read it once. Then she forwarded it to her own email, time-stamped. Then she pulled up the Pecan House scheduling records on the employee portal, which she had been taking screenshots of at the start of each pay period, a habit she had established in month 2, and compared the current schedule to the last 6 weeks. Customer volume had not declined. 3 of her shifts had been redistributed to Linda and to a new part-time hire whom Merck had brought on 10 days after the coffee incident. She opened her notebook and wrote, shift reduction communicated by text, 6:42 a.m. Friday. Framed as volume-based, actual volume steady per portal records, screenshots attached in F folder. Reduction follows pattern documented redirection of regular tables and incident report filing. Then she called her contact at the Georgia Department of Labor's Workers' Compensation and Workplace Safety Division, not to file a complaint yet, not formally, but to ask a question she already knew the answer to. She asked whether an employer was required to maintain the same number of scheduled hours for an employee during the period following a documented workplace injury. The answer, as she had known it would be, was that reducing hours in the period immediately following a formal injury report could constitute retaliatory conduct under OCGA Section 346A3, Georgia's Fair Employment Practices Framework, and under 29 CFR Section 977, the federal OSHA anti-retaliation provision. She wrote both citations in her notebook. She did not look them up. She wrote them from memory, the way someone writes a street address they have known for years, correctly, without hesitation, without being asked where she had learned it. The technical escalation came through Wells Ford, and it was considerably more sophisticated than the social maneuvering. Imani discovered it on a Monday morning when she arrived early, as she always did, and accessed the employee portal to take her beginning of period scheduling screenshot. The portal also contained a tab labeled Incident Records, accessible to all employees, which Imani had been checking periodically since the coffee incident. On that Monday morning, the incident report she had watched Merck fill out, the one she had photographed through the glass partition of the office door as he dated and signed it, showed a different date. The original date had been a Tuesday. The record now showed the following Thursday, 2 days after the shift reduction text, which placed the injury report chronologically after the scheduling change, rather than before it. The significance of this was procedural but important. If the incident report predated the shift reduction, the reduction could be characterized as retaliatory. If the incident report followed the shift reduction, the retaliation claim became considerably more complicated to support. Someone had gone into the system and changed 2 digits. Imani took a screenshot of the portal record. Then she opened the folder on her phone labeled F and pulled up the photograph she had taken of Merck's office to the glass partition the morning of the incident. The photograph that showed Merck's hand holding the pen over the completed form. The date visible in the upper right corner of the page. The date in the photograph and the date now in the portal record were not the same. She looked at this for a long moment. Then she wrote in her notebook, Portal incident record, date altered. Original, confirmed by photo documentation. Current portal entry, discrepancy of 2 days. Change moves injury report to post-reduction position. Possible actors. Merck, Wells Ford per system access log. Will need to confirm who has editing permissions in the portal. She underlined the last sentence. Then she wrote in the F column, photo of original form retained, screenshots of both portal versions archived, chain documented. She did not confront anyone. She did not mention it. She simply went to work. The physical escalation did not come from Floyd Kessler. It came from a direction she had half anticipated and half hoped would not materialize, which was Deputy Sloan Avery of the Maywood Police Department. Avery had 21 years on the force, 9 of them as deputy under the current chief. He was not a villain in the operatic sense. He was something more common, and in some ways more difficult to address. A man whose default position was skepticism toward complaints that came from people he had unconsciously decided were less reliable witnesses to their own experiences. He had not arrived at this position through malice. He had arrived at it through the accumulated weight of a career spent deciding who got the benefit of the doubt, and those decisions had followed a pattern he had never examined because the pattern was invisible to him. Imani had submitted a formal written complaint to the Maywood Police Department 11 days after the coffee incident, citing the dispatch log irregularity, call ID 4411, time-stamped 7:54 a.m., recording a complaint that had been phoned in before the parties being complained about had arrived on the premises. This was not a minor discrepancy. It documented premeditation. It meant that Floyd Kessler, or someone acting at his direction, had contacted the police to preposition a narrative before the encounter even took place. Deputy Avery came to the Pecan house on a Wednesday at 9 a.m., between the breakfast rush and the late morning quiet, which told her that he had timed the visit deliberately. He was in uniform, but not in a cruiser, parked his personal vehicle 2 doors down, which meant he was here without an official call log entry. She noted that immediately. He sat at the counter with a cup of coffee she poured herself, and he said, "Miss Cross, I read what you submitted. I want to have a conversation." She sat the coffee pot down and folded her hands on the counter. "You understand I have to consider the whole picture here," he said. "Floyd Kessler's been part of this community for almost 2 decades. He's got a business, he's on the Chamber of Commerce, and look, he doesn't have a history of this kind of thing." "The dispatch log has a timestamp," Imani said. "Call ID 4411, 7:54 a.m. My records show the party at table 7 was not seated until 7:56. Dispatch logs can have sync errors. The systems update on a different Deputy Avery." She reached under the counter and set a printed document on the surface between them. "This is the Calverton County Sheriff's Department's published protocol for dispatch log timestamping. Page 7 states that call entry timestamps are system-generated at moment of call receipt, not at the time of dispatch. There is no sync offset between receipt and entry. The timestamp on call ID 4411 reflects when the call was made, not when a unit was assigned." Avery looked at the document. He looked at it the way people look at something they cannot immediately refute, but have not yet decided to acknowledge. He was, she knew, not a stupid man. He had simply never encountered a waitress who arrived at a conversation about her own complaint carrying the relevant department protocols in printed form, with the applicable section flagged. "I'll look into it," he said. "I'd appreciate that in writing," she said, "so I have documentation of the follow-up process." His jaw moved slightly. He was recalibrating, not toward hostility, but toward a kind of wary respect that had not been in his posture when he walked in. "I'll send you something," he said. He did, 3 days later, a 1-paragraph email that confirmed receipt of her complaint and indicated it was under preliminary review. Not a finding, not a formal acknowledgement of the dispatch log irregularity, but a paper trail, his name, his address, her complaint, and a date. She printed it and filed it with a note, "Avery, written confirmation of receipt, framed as preliminary, not formal, sufficient for chain. D." The thing about Deputy Avery was that he had done something he had not intended to do when he walked into the Pecan house that Wednesday morning. He had put himself in the chain. Whatever happened next, there was a written record that the Maywood Police Department had been notified and had responded. That record would matter. What Avery could not have known, and would not know until much later, was that the interaction had also told Imani something important about the shape of what she was facing. The fact that he had come in person, in civilian clothes, without a log entry, meant that someone had told him about her complaint before it reached his desk through official channels. The complaint had been filed through the department's public submission portal, which was theoretically a closed system. The fact that Avery had gotten there, to the diner, casually, 2 days later, already prepared with a specific framing, meant the information had traveled through an informal channel first. She thought about that on the walk home. She thought about it the same way she had been trained to think about information transfer, by working backward from the output to the probable source. Avery had not arrived hostile. He had arrived with a prepared narrative. Dispatch logs can have sync errors. Floyd's been part of this community, which meant someone had briefed him on both the specific content of her complaint and a specific strategy for addressing it before it became official. That preparation required time. That time required an alert. The alert required access. The circle was smaller than it looked. 2 days after Avery's email, Floyd Kessler came back to the Pecan house. He came alone this time, without Garrett Hull or the man with the cap, and he sat at table 7 again, and he ordered coffee again. Imani brought it. He let her set it down, and then he said, quietly, conversationally, as if they were continuing a discussion she had agreed to be part of. You know, there's a hearing next month on the renewal of food service operating licenses in this county. I'm on the Chamber's advisory committee. Just thought you'd want to know. She looked at him. He picked up his coffee cup. Heard the manager might have some concerns about certain staff members' effect on the customer environment. He continued, nothing serious, just conversations. She said nothing. You're a smart woman, he said, in the same register as before, the low, private register. Smarter than most people here give you credit for, which is why I think you understand what a drawn-out complaint process costs. Not just time, energy, the kind of attention that makes people nervous around a business. She picked up her pad. Are you ready to order, sir? He looked at her for a long moment. The smile that followed was the one she had seen on the morning with the coffee. The smile that does not connect to anything warm, that is purely architectural, purely about how a face presents itself when a person has decided they have already won. Just the coffee, he said. She wrote it down. She noted the time, 9:14 a.m. She went to the back of the house and she added to her notebook. FK returned, solo, table 7, referenced license renewal hearing, chamber advisory role, referenced Merck conversations re-staff, framed as information sharing, tone, implicit threat, no direct statement, 9:14 a.m. In the F column she wrote, corresponds with Alderman Vane's oversight of business and economic development committee. Cross-reference, license renewal timing, document. She also wrote, in a line by itself at the bottom of the page, pattern complete, individual, social, professional, legal, physical, institutional, all documented, all dated. There was something else she noted, though she wrote it on a separate page and in smaller letters than usual. The way Kessler had spoken to her in that second encounter was different from the first. On the morning of the coffee, he had been confident in the casual, unthinking way of a man who has never had to calculate the risk of his behavior. On this visit, he was still confident, but the confidence had a deliberate quality. He had rehearsed the lines about the chamber committee and the license hearing. They were too smooth, too well placed to be spontaneous. He was delivering a message that someone had composed, partly or entirely, on his behalf. Floyd Kessler was not clever enough to build the structure she had been documenting. He was angry enough and entitled enough and well-connected enough to be useful to someone who was. That someone had a reason to want Imani Cross to stop asking questions. A reason that went beyond a spilled cup of coffee and a dispatch log. She thought about Lavender Quint's husband on the Business and Economic Development Committee. She thought about the letter, the one Darnell Okafor's office had told her about 3 weeks earlier. The letter from the city attorney's office questioning a site assessment process related to a housing development project that had been 6 years in the making. She thought about the email she had received 4 days ago with a subject line that read, Pecan House Site, Assessment Hold, forwarded to her without comment by someone whose name she recognized from a context entirely separate from the diner. She thought about all of this the way she thought about most complex problems, by laying the pieces flat in her mind and looking at the space between them, because the space between documented facts was where the actual story usually lived. Then she went back out and refilled Kessler's coffee without being asked, because she was at work, and at work she did her job. On her break that day, she sat in the prep area with her notebook and a cup of tea, and she read back through it, not the events which she knew by heart, but the structure, the pattern of escalation, the sequence of actors, the way each piece had been designed to exist at a level just below formal accountability, while cumulatively producing something unmistakable. This was not random small-town friction. This was coordinated. The dispatch log had been the tell, the one mistake made in advance, before everything else was carefully calibrated to be deniable. Someone had panicked that morning or acted on impulse, and the impulse had left a timestamp that the rest of the structure was now built to obscure. There was a reason people who work in coordinated systems make their worst mistakes early. The beginning of a plan is the moment when the outcome still feels theoretical. When it's easy to believe that a small, preemptive action, a call made from a car, a date changed on a form, will accomplish what it's supposed to accomplish and then disappear cleanly into the background. The timestamp at 7:54 a.m. was the evidence that someone had believed their own plan well enough to execute it before the situation even existed. That kind of confidence, the confidence that makes a person phone in a complaint 2 minutes before the people being complained about have walked through the door, was the confidence of someone who had done this before and been right to do it. Until now. She thought about the phony date on the portal incident record. That was Wells Ford. She was now nearly certain of it based on system access logs she had quietly obtained through the employee portal's administrative audit function, which she had accessed using the manager-level credentials that Merck had issued her during her first week and never revoked. The audit logs showed that the incident record had been accessed and modified on a Thursday evening at 8:47 p.m. from an employee account with the initials WF. She added this to her D column. Then she looked at the front pocket of her apron where she kept the notebook, and she thought about the envelope in her apartment, the flat, sealed envelope in the locked drawer beneath the shelf in the second bedroom, the one she had written on in small letters, "When it's time." She had known when she placed it there, 8 months ago, before any of this, before the coffee, before Kessler, before Lavender Quint had decided the atmosphere had changed, that the time would eventually announce itself. She had not known precisely how. She had not needed to know how. She had understood that the kind of environment she had moved into in Maywood was the kind that does what it is designed to do. It applies pressure incrementally from multiple directions until the target either yields or reveals themselves. She had been waiting to see which pressure would come first. Now she knew. Now she had a sequence. She was beginning to think it was time. At the end of her shift, at 2:15 p.m., she clocked out and walked home the 3 blocks to Marble Street. She unlocked her apartment door. She went to the second bedroom. She unlocked the drawer. She took out the envelope and set it on the desk, but she did not open it yet. She looked at it for a long moment. The handwriting on the front was her own, careful, even, unhurried. When it's time, she put it back in the drawer. Not yet, but close enough now that she could feel the timing the way you feel weather shifting. Not a storm yet, but the specific quality of air that precedes one. She went back to the kitchen and made herself tea. She sat at the small kitchen table and opened her notebook and wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. She wrote the time. She wrote at the top of the column, "Next steps." And then below the kitchen window where the late afternoon light was coming through in long, level bars, illuminating nothing in particular and everything she had built toward, Imani Cross began to plan. Not the patient, incremental planning of the last 8 months, the focused, surgical planning of someone who has been building long enough and has enough material, and has just determined that it is time to build something with it. 3 days after Kessler's solo visit, a woman Imani had never seen before came into the pecan house at 6:58 a.m., ordered coffee and a corn muffin, and sat at a small table near the window for 37 minutes. She did not look at her phone. She did not read. She looked at the room, the tables, the counter, the notice board near the entrance, with the particular, methodical attention of someone cataloging rather than simply observing. She was in her mid-40s, professionally dressed in the understated way of someone who traveled frequently and had learned to pack things that worked in multiple contexts. She sat with her back to the wall and her face to the room, which was a specific and telling choice of seat position. She asked no questions. She made no requests beyond her initial order. She watched. Imani served her without comment. She poured the coffee, brought the corn muffin on a small plate, and returned to her other tables. But she noted, with the part of her mind that was always noting, the woman's eyes had moved from the entrance to the legal notice board near the door within the first 30 seconds of sitting down. She had read it, all of it, not in the scanning way that most people look at posted notices, but in the reading way, the way Imani herself read it every morning. That was the first thing. The second thing was that when Imani passed table 3 on her way back from the kitchen, at the 20-minute mark, the woman's coffee cup was exactly as full as it had been when Imani refilled it 8 minutes earlier. She was not drinking. She was using the cup as a prop. She was here to observe, not to eat. Imani finished the shift. She cashed out Mrs. Potts and the contractors and the foretop near the back. She worked until 2:10 p.m. She did not approach the woman's table again after the initial service. When she paid, she left a card on top of her receipt. Imani picked it up after she left. The card had a name, a title she had not expected, and a number with a Georgia area code. Below the number, handwritten in small, precise letters, Ms. Cross, when you're ready, I'm available. Imani set the card down on the counter. She looked at it for a moment. She turned it over. On the back, in the same handwriting, I've been here before, not this diner, this situation. The sentence had the quality of something said by someone who has chosen each word specifically, not to be cryptic, but because precision mattered to them, and they wanted Imani to know it. I've been here before did not mean she had eaten at this particular establishment, and this situation was not a general reference to conflict or unfairness. It was a reference to something specific, to a pattern, to a network of small actors operating in coordination, to the particular kind of institutional harassment that is constructed to be individually deniable and collectively undeniable. She put the card in her notebook, in the D column page for that day. Then she opened the drawer under the counter, the one behind the register, the one she kept locked, the one that held a second copy of everything, and she did something she had not done since the day she moved to Maywood. She counted pages. There were 231 of them. She closed the drawer. She locked it. She went to take the order of the 2 contractors who had just come through the door, because that was the job, and she had always been someone who finishes the job. But as she walked back across the floor, she was also doing something she had not done in several weeks. She was calculating. Not timelines, not next steps, not the legal sequence she had been constructing with the careful patience of a person who knows that a case built slowly rarely collapses. Something older than strategy, something that lived in the body rather than the mind. She was calculating how much longer she needed to wait. Outside, the morning was doing what mornings in Maywood always did, arriving slow and steady, as if it had nothing to prove. The light came through the front windows the way it had every morning for 2 years, laying across the floor in the same long bars, illuminating the same laminate tables, the same worn counter stools, the same notice board near the entrance with its framed statutory language and its careful, even typography. She had read those words every morning for 2 years. She would read them again tomorrow. The lock on the staff locker clicked twice, then silence. The card said, Iris Penn. Beneath the name, in clean serif type, Senior Investigator, Georgia Department of Labor, Workplace Safety and Anti-Retaliation Division. A number with a Macon area code. And below that, the handwritten line Imani had already read 4 times by the time she got home that evening. She called the number at 9 o'clock the following morning, before her shift, sitting at her kitchen table with her notebook open and her tea still hot. Iris Penn picked up on the second ring, the way people answer when they have been expecting a call and have decided in advance not to let it go to voicemail. Ms. Cross. Her voice was measured, professional, with the particular quality of someone who has spent a long career being precise in the moments when precision matters most. I'm glad you called. You came into my diner, Imani said. You read the notice board. A pause, not hesitation, but consideration. I did. You weren't there about the corn muffin. No, Iris Penn said. I wasn't. Another pause. I received a copy of your formal complaint to the Department of Labor, the one filed 6 weeks ago. I also received, through a separate channel, a copy of a FOIA request you submitted to the Calverton County Sheriff's Department for call records associated with call ID 4411. She stopped. Both documents were filed correctly, completely, with appropriate citations and supporting materials. In 23 years in this division, I have received approximately 11,000 complaints. I have seen fewer than 40 that were submitted with the level of documentation and procedural accuracy yours contained. Imani said nothing. I'm not calling to compliment your filing system, Iris Penn continued. I'm calling because what you submitted, and I want to be precise about this, constitutes a prima facie case of retaliatory employment action under 29 CFR Section 977 and a possible pattern of racially motivated workplace discrimination cognizable under 42 U.S.C. Section 1981. That is not language I use loosely. That is language I use when I believe I'm looking at something that will hold up to serious scrutiny. Another pause. I'd like to meet with you this week, not at the diner. They met at the public library on Thursday afternoon in a small study room off the reference section that had a door that closed and a table that fit 2 people comfortably. Imani brought her notebook. She brought the F folder on her phone, the photographs, the timestamps, the screenshots. She brought the copy of the incident report she had photographed through Merck's office glass, the one with the original date that did not match the current portal entry. Iris Penn brought a legal pad and a pen and nothing else. She sat down, uncapped the pen and said, "Walk me through it, from the beginning." Imani walked her through it. She took 47 minutes. She did not editorialize. She presented each entry in sequence, the date, the time, the observed behavior, the documentation. She read from the notebook when she needed to, which was not often because she knew the sequence the way she knew the notice board, completely, without effort, in the order in which it mattered. When she got to the portal date discrepancy, she set her phone on the table between them with the 2 screenshots side by side, the photograph of Merck's original form and the portal entry as it currently existed. Iris Penn looked at both images for a long time without speaking. "The audit log," she said finally. "You said you have the access record." Imani pulled up the audit screenshot. Employee account initials, WF Thursday, 8:47 p.m. Iris Penn wrote something on her legal pad. She did not say whose initials those were or what she intended to do with the information. She just wrote, and then she looked up and said, "Ms. Cross, I want to be straightforward with you about what this process looks like. My division opens a formal inquiry. That takes time, typically 2 to 3 months before we produce preliminary findings. During that period, I cannot discuss the content of the inquiry with you or anyone else. What I can tell you is that what you brought me today is sufficient to open that inquiry immediately. And once it's open, the evidentiary standard for this department's preliminary findings is whether a reasonable inference of retaliation exists. Based on what I've seen in this room today," she tapped her legal pad once, "that standard is met." Imani asked the question that had been sitting at the back of her mind since the card appeared on her counter. "How did you know to come to the diner?" Iris Penn looked at her evenly. "Someone sent me a copy of your FOIA request. The envelope had a Maywood postmark and no return address." She recapped her pen. "Whoever sent it had your interests in mind." Imani drove home from the library, and for the first time in weeks, she did not open her notebook when she walked through the door. She sat in the kitchen for a while in the quiet. Then she went to the second bedroom, unlocked the drawer, and took out the envelope. She did not put it back this time. She set it on the kitchen table, and she sat down across from it, and she looked at it the way she had been looking at it for 8 months, with the patience of a person who has always known that choosing the right moment is not the same thing as not acting. She opened it. Inside was a single document, 4 pages, printed, with a cover sheet that bore a seal she recognized. Beneath the seal, a title. Beneath the title, her name. Not her current name, not the name she had signed on the Pecan House application, not the name in Dorian Merck's personnel files. Her full name, as it appeared on federal documentation, with her rank and her unit number, and the date of her honorable discharge. 19 years, 4 deployments, 14 commendations, of which 3 were classified and not listed on the document. The last line of the cover sheet read, "Service record, exemplary. Separation, voluntary." She read it once through. Then she folded it back along its original creases and returned it to the envelope and set the envelope on the kitchen table where it had been. The time, she had decided, was now. What happened next moved the way institutional processes move when all the preliminary conditions are finally met. Not fast, not dramatic, but with the specific accumulating momentum of a structure that has been properly built and is now being used for the purpose it was built for. Iris Penn opened the formal inquiry 8 days after their meeting at the library. The inquiry generated, under Georgia Department of Labor protocols, a mandatory notice to Dorian Merck and to the chain restaurant's regional compliance office, informing them that an investigation was underway and that all employment records for the period in question were subject to preservation orders. Merck received this notice on a Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, he had forwarded it to the regional compliance office, which had forwarded it to a law firm in Atlanta that represented the chain on employment matters. By Monday, there was a lawyer in Maywood who had driven from Atlanta and was sitting in Merck's office with the door closed. Imani came in for her Tuesday shift, as she had every Tuesday for 2 years. She tied her apron, poured the first pot, read the notice board. She noted in her notebook that Wells Ford had not come in for his shift. She noted that Dorian Merck's office light was on before 6 a.m., which was not his practice. She noted that table 7 was empty at 8:03 a.m., which was not Floyd Kessler's practice. She served breakfast. She refilled Mrs. Potts's decaf with a half teaspoon of honey already stirred in. She did not mention any of it. 3 weeks later, Chantel Voss from the Maywood County Gazette called her at home. Chantel was 28, a staff reporter who covered county government and the school board and the occasional human interest piece. And she had a quality that Imani had identified the one time they had spoken briefly at a community meeting. She listened longer than most journalists before she decided what the story was. She had received, through a source she described only as someone with relevant information, copies of 2 documents. The first was the Calverton County Sheriff's Department dispatch log for the morning of the coffee incident, showing call ID 4411, time-stamped 7:54 a.m. The second was a city attorney letter, dated 3 weeks before the coffee incident, routed from the deputy mayor's office, referencing a site assessment hold on a property linked to a federal housing development project. "I'm trying to understand how these 2 things are connected," Chantel said. "I've been looking at the housing project. It involves a federal grant tied to an assessment of a specific site. The assessment required a primary community contact. The primary contact listed is Pecan House Grill. The owner of Pecan House is a corporation, but the day-to-day contact listed in the federal paperwork is an employee, a morning shift waitress named Imani Cross." Imani said, "That's accurate." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Chantel was writing. "The letter from the city attorney," Chantel continued, "requested a restart of the assessment process with a different primary contact. That request came from the deputy mayor's office. The deputy mayor is Alderman Carter Vane's wife." "Also accurate," Imani said. "Ms. Cross, can I ask you something directly?" "You can ask." "Did you know when you took the job at Pecan House that the diner had been designated as a primary contact point for this federal assessment? Imani said, "I think you may need to make a few more calls before we have that conversation. I'd suggest starting with the Georgia Department of Labor's public inquiry log." Chantel made those calls. The article ran 11 days later in the County Gazette, a 1,200-word piece on the front of the local news section under a headline that named no one's identity, but described, with careful precision, the documented connection between a dispatch log irregularity, a tampered employment record, a city attorney letter, and an open state labor inquiry. Chantel had verified every fact independently. She had included the specific statute numbers. She had noted, in the fourth paragraph, that the employee at the center of the inquiry had declined to comment on her employment history prior to Maywood, which she described as not relevant to the current matter. The article was picked up the following week by 2 regional outlets and shared several thousand times on county social media pages. Alderman Carter Vane released a statement through his office saying he had no knowledge of the events described and would cooperate with any inquiry. Deputy Mayor Lavender Quint did not release a statement. Floyd Kessler did not release a statement. Dorian Merck did not release a statement. The law firm representing the chain's regional compliance office released a statement saying the company takes all workplace safety concerns seriously and is cooperating fully with the Georgia Department of Labor. What none of those statements addressed, and what Chantel Voss noted pointedly in a follow-up piece 10 days later, was the question of the FOIA response. Imani had submitted her public records request for dispatch call logs to the Calverton County Sheriff's Department 41 days before the council session. The department had responded, as required, within 30 days. What it returned was partially redacted. Call ID 4411 was present and unredacted. The timestamp, the notation, the complainant name, all of it intact. But the origin of the call, the specific unit or phone number from which it had been placed, had been blacked out with a single clean bar of black ink. A notation at the bottom cited OCGA Section 50A330 as the basis for the exemption, Law Enforcement Intelligence Records. Imani had noted this in her notebook under D with one follow-up line. Exemption cited, verify applicability, possible grounds for challenge. Iris Penn, when Imani mentioned it at their second meeting, had looked at the notation and said, without particular expression, OCGA 50A330 applies to ongoing intelligence investigations. If the department invoked it for a 2-month-old dispatch log from a harassment complaint at a diner, someone made a deliberate choice to classify that call record. That choice is itself a document. She wrote something on her legal pad. She did not share what she wrote. The redacted origin line remained redacted. It remained unexplained. The Maywood City Council scheduled a public session for the 3rd Thursday of the following month. The session was listed on the agenda as a community forum on workplace standards and municipal accountability. It was held in the main council chamber, which seated 120 people. 147 attended. The overflow sat in the hallway and listened through the open door. Imani Cross was the 4th person to speak. She walked to the microphone with her notebook in her left hand and the envelope in her right, and she stood at the podium the way she stood behind the counter, straight, still, unhurried. The chamber was quiet. She had noticed when she sat down that Floyd Kessler was not present. Lavender Quint was in the 2nd row, with Carter Vane beside her. Dorian Merck was not present. Wells Ford was not present. Deputy Sloan Avery was in the back, in civilian clothes, with the posture of someone who was there professionally, even though nothing about his presence was formal. She opened her notebook. She said, "I'd like to read from the official record." She read from the Calverton County Sheriff's Department dispatch log, call ID 4411, time-stamped 7:54 a.m. She read the exact notation. Unit responding to Pecan House Grill, Calvert Street. Report of disturbance. Complainant, Floyd Kessler. She said, "The timestamp reflects the moment the call was received. Per the department's own published protocol, document date March 2019, page 7. Dispatch log timestamps are system-generated at moment of call receipt with no sync offset. The individuals named in this complaint were not on the premises at 7:54 a.m. I arrived for my shift at 7:48. The party at table 7 was seated at 7:56. She paused. No one spoke. She read from the employment portal audit log, date, time, employee account initials, the original incident report date, and the modified date. She did not name Wells Ford. She said, "The modification moved the report date forward by 2 days, placing it after the shift reduction communication I received by text on a Thursday morning." I have both documents here, dated and authenticated. The photograph of the original form and the portal record as it currently exists are in the materials I am submitting to the council tonight as part of the public record. She set the notebook down and picked up the envelope. "I want to be precise about what I'm about to say," she told the chamber. "Not because I'm trying to be dramatic, because precision is what this situation has required from the beginning, and I don't intend to abandon it now." She opened the envelope and took out the 4-page document with the federal seal. She did not hold it up. She did not wave it. She set it flat on the podium and read from it the way she read from everything, as if the words were data, as if data was enough, as if data had always been enough, and the problem had never been the data. "My name is Imani Cross. I served in the United States Army for 19 years. I completed 4 deployments. Prior to my voluntary separation, I held the rank of Warrant Officer 2 and served as a counterintelligence agent with a focus on financial crime, organizational corruption, and pattern documentation. I moved to Maywood 2.5 years ago because Maywood had been identified in a federal assessment process conducted under the Community Development Block Grant Framework as a site with significant housing infrastructure needs and a documented pattern of irregular municipal contracting. I came to document that pattern. I took a job at the Pecan House because a diner was connected to the assessment process and because in my professional experience, the best place to observe a pattern of coordinated institutional pressure is from inside the environment where it operates. The chamber was completely still. She folded the document back into the envelope. She said, "I did not expect the pattern to make itself this obvious this quickly." The dispatch log entry on the morning of the coffee incident, call ID 4411, represents the single clearest piece of documentation I have encountered in this assignment. Someone contacted the sheriff's department 2 minutes before the subject of the complaint arrived on the premises. That is not spontaneous. That is coordination. And coordination of that kind, in a context involving a federal assessment process connected to a 6-year housing development project, implicates a set of interests that are larger than one man's entitlement to a corner booth. She closed the envelope. She looked at the counsel, and then she said something that she had not written in any notebook and had not planned in any meeting room. "I want to be clear that I am not here representing any agency tonight. I am here as a resident of Maywood and as an employee of a business that has been subjected to documented, coordinated harassment. Those are my grounds for speaking. The rest is what the record shows." She stepped back from the microphone. She walked to her seat. The room remained quiet for a long moment. The specific kind of quiet that follows when a room full of people are simultaneously rearranging everything they thought they understood about a situation. Then Deacon Ezra Park, who was seated 3 rows from the front, stood up without being called and said, "I have eaten at that diner every Friday for 2 years. I want the council to know what kind of person this community has had in its midst and has failed to protect." The council chair allowed him to speak for 3 minutes. What followed in the next 8 weeks was not dramatic. Institutional responses rarely are. They are slow and partial and procedurally complicated, and they have the quality of a system adjusting itself the minimum amount necessary to reduce pressure. Not because systems are malicious, but because systems are designed for self-continuity, and self-continuity is not the same thing as accountability. The Georgia Department of Labor's preliminary findings, issued 6 weeks after Iris Penn's inquiry opened, found that Imani Cross's shift reduction occurred within the protected reporting period as defined by 29 CFR Section 977, and that the evidentiary record does not support the employer's characterization of said reduction as volume-based. The finding used the word preliminary 3 times in 5 sentences. It did not, on its own, compel reinstatement or compensation. It opened a second phase of inquiry and established a baseline for any civil action that might follow. The chain's regional compliance office, advised by their Atlanta law firm, placed Dorian Merck on paid administrative leave pending an internal review. They did not fire him. They did not say publicly what the review would examine. The company released a statement about commitment to workplace dignity. Wells Ford resigned before the internal review could formally implicate him. He was not prosecuted. The law firm advised that the portal audit log, while admissible as evidence of access, did not constitute proof of intent under the evidentiary standard required for a criminal tampering charge. He left Maywood. No one announced it. Floyd Kessler was issued a formal notice by the Pecan House chain prohibiting him from the premises, effective immediately. The notice cited the company's code of conduct regarding customer behavior toward staff. He was not charged with any crime. His conduct on the morning of the coffee incident, the physical contact with the tray, the burn, had been characterized in the formal incident report, as Merck had written it, as accidental. Imani's photograph of the original form did not change the characterization in the report. It merely demonstrated that the form had been written as it had been written, which was its own kind of documentation. Deputy Sloan Avery sent her an email 10 days after the council session. It was 4 sentences. It said that the Maywood Police Department had completed a review of the dispatch log procedures and had identified a gap in pre-shift coordination protocol that had allowed the call ID 4411 entry to be placed without appropriate supervisory verification. It said the department had implemented a new verification step. It did not say who had placed the call before Imani arrived. It said, "I regret that this process was not more thorough from the beginning." She printed the email. She filed it. She did not respond. She had thought about him more than she expected in the weeks after the session. Not with anger. Anger required energy, and she had learned long ago that energy spent on anger was energy not spent on documentation. But with something closer to the detached, professional curiosity she applied to systems that were failing in predictable ways. Avery had not been a bad officer in the simple sense. He had been a predictable one. He had seen what he expected to see, believed what it was convenient to believe, and then arrived at a woman's place of employment with a prepared narrative designed to talk her out of her own accurately filed complaint. The fact that he had, in the end, put himself in the chain was the small irony at the center of the whole thing. The visit he had made to minimize her had become the document she needed to establish that the department had been on notice. She noted this in the margin of his email, in small letters. Avery, self-documentation, added to chain. Then she filed it alphabetically with the rest. The City Council's formal response, issued at the following month's regular session, consisted of a 4-paragraph resolution committing to a review of the municipal complaint process for workplace incidents involving city-licensed businesses. The resolution did not mention Lavender Quint's office or the city attorney letter that had been sent 3 weeks before the coffee incident. That letter, when Chantel Voss submitted a FOIA request for it, was returned with 2 paragraphs fully redacted. The routing notation at the top, the internal notation showing the requesting office, was also redacted, but the signature line at the bottom was not. Assistant City Attorney R. Fowler. Chantel published the partially redacted document with a note that routing information had been withheld. The story ran on the front page. The federal housing assessment was not restarted. The city attorney's request to designate a different primary contact was, under the federal grant framework, insufficient on its own to compel a process restart. The assessment remained on hold, pending the Department of Labor inquiry. When the preliminary findings were issued 6 weeks later, the hold was lifted. The assessment moved forward. The housing project, 6 years in planning, a development that would bring 230 affordable units to a county that had a documented shortage of 400, remained on track, delayed by 4 months but not derailed. Imani learned this from Darnell Okafor, who called her the Tuesday after the preliminary findings were released. At 8:45 a.m., in the brief window between the end of her shift and the midday prep. His voice had the same measured quality it had always had, and the current beneath it had shifted, from the careful concern of someone managing a complication to something that sounded, simply, like relief. She said, "Good." He said, "Ms. Cross, I want to say something directly." "Go ahead." "When you told me 2 years ago that you wanted to be listed as the primary community contact for this assessment, I thought it was unusual, a new employee at a diner. I said yes because the protocol allowed it and because you presented your case clearly. I did not fully understand what I was agreeing to." A pause. "I understand it now." She said, "You helped by staying in the process. That mattered." He said, "You're very measured for someone who just..." He stopped, started again. "You're very measured." She thought about that for a moment, about what it meant to be called measured, in this context, by someone who had watched the situation from the outside and was now telling her, gently, not unkindly, that her composure had been visible to him as a quality, as a thing that was present and deliberate rather than simply absent of something else. She thought about the first morning, the burn across her shoulder, the smile that had not moved. She thought about the notebook. She thought about 231 pages of dates and times and initials and columns labeled O and D and F. It was always a documentation problem, she said. The rest was just patience. He said, "I hope you're getting some rest." She said, "I am." She went back to work. She took the order of the 2 contractors who had come in while she was on the phone. She refilled Mrs. Potts's coffee. She read the notice board near the entrance, the same notice she had read every morning for 2.5 years. The framed statutory language, the careful typography, the words that said what they said and had always meant exactly what they meant. She thought about the notice board more than people would expect if they had known about any of this. She had not posted it. The frame had been there when she arrived. The statutory language was standard, required, the same in every food service establishment in the state. But she had read it the first morning because it was there, and the second morning because she had the habit, and every morning after that because the habit had become something else. Not ritual exactly, not superstition, but the daily confirmation that the language existed, that it said what it said, that the words on the sign and the words in the law and the words in her notebook were all pointing in the same direction. She had spent 2.5 years pointing in that direction, quietly, without announcement, from behind a counter, in a navy-bordered apron, with a notebook in her pocket and a pen that was always uncapped. The following Friday, Deacon Ezra Park came in at 6:55 a.m., as he had every Friday for 2 years. He ordered his oatmeal with dried cranberries. When she brought it, he looked at her and said, "Ms. Cross." He said it the way Iris Penn had said it, the way Darnell Okafor had said it on the phone, with a quality that was not deference and was not pity, but was something she did not have a single clean word for, something in the vicinity of recognition, of one person seeing another person accurately and saying so with the only tool available, which was a name. She said, "Deacon Park." He said, "How are you holding up?" She looked at him. She considered the question the way she considered most things, carefully, without rushing toward an answer. "I'm well," she said. "Thank you for speaking at the session. Someone needed to." She nodded, and she went back behind the counter, and she opened her notebook to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote the date. She wrote the time. In the column headed O, she wrote, "Community contact reestablished. Assessment proceeding. Preliminary findings issued. Internal review ongoing. WF departed. DM on administrative leave. FK barred from premises." She looked at the list. Then she moved to the D column and wrote carefully and without embellishment, "All of the above, confirmed." She paused with her pen on the page. Then she wrote one more line in the F column, the column she had added on the day of the coffee incident, the column she had labeled followed up. She wrote, "Envelope 2, not yet." She closed the notebook. She slipped it back into the front pocket of her apron. She went to refill the contractor's coffee. Chantel Voss called her that afternoon. Not about a new story, just to say that the County Gazette had received 3 letters to the editor following the front page piece about the redacted attorney letter. 2 of them were in support. One was from someone who described themselves only as a longtime Maywood resident and stated that certain people had come to this town under false pretenses and done significant damage to the community's trust. Chantel read it to her in full, including the closing line. "Some questions about who exactly this woman is and why she was really here have not been fully answered." Chantel said, "I'm not going to run it. I'm just letting you know it exists." Imani said she appreciated that. She meant it. The envelope was still there. The document was still there, folded along its original creases. The federal seal slightly compressed from being opened and refolded once. Beneath the document, at the bottom of the drawer, was a second sealed envelope she had not opened. It had arrived, with a Macon postmark, 11 days after the council session. On the front, in her own handwriting, because she had addressed it to herself and mailed it before she left Atlanta 2.5 years ago, it said, "After." She had not opened it yet. She was not sure she was ready for what came after the after. Outside, the morning light was moving across the floor of the pecan house, the way it always did, steady, unhurried, as if it had been doing this since long before any of this started and intended to keep doing it long after. The laminate tables, the worn counter stools, the notice board near the entrance, the same room it had always been. Somewhere across town, an email sat in a server queue, flagged with a subject line no one had yet explained. St. Final authorization. The sender address was a string of numbers with no name attached. The recipient line was redacted in the copy Chantel Voss had obtained, except for 2 initials at the very end. LQ. The email had been sent 4 days before the morning Floyd Kessler walked through the front door of the pecan house and picked up the phone to call the sheriff's department about people who had not arrived yet. No one had asked about those initials in public. No one had explained the authorization being referenced. The investigation Chantel Voss had noted in her final paragraph as ongoing remained exactly that, ongoing, preliminary, unresolved. The lock on the staff locker clicked twice, then silence. Imani Cross never raised her voice. She never had to. Because the most powerful thing a person can carry into an unfair fight is not anger, it is accuracy. 2 years of dates, times, and columns, 231 pages that said, simply, "I was here, this happened, and I can prove it." That is the lesson. The people who tried to move her were counting on the one thing that defeats most people in her position, the exhaustion of being disbelieved. They expected her to get tired before they did. She did not get tired. She got organized. There is something they never understood about the woman pouring their coffee. Discipline is invisible until it is not. Patience looks like weakness until it becomes evidence. And a person who has spent 19 years learning to read the space between what is said and what is documented, that person is never as unprotected as they appear. The dispatch log entry was made at 7:54 a.m. The smile never moved when the cup hit the floor. And somewhere in a locked drawer on Marble Street, a second envelope still waits, addressed to the only person who knew exactly what it contained. If this story made you feel something, hit that like button and subscribe, because every week we bring you exactly this, the reminder that the most dangerous person in any room is the one taking notes.